mapas, ¿no? Y todas esas aproximaciones tan innovadoras, ¿no? Para conocer el destino y el origen de la basura marina. Entonces, tenemos como primera intervención Hilda de Pablo, de la Universidad Lusófona, y nos va a hablar con Sara Cloux de la Universidad de Santiago sobre los avances en modelizado y mapeo de la basura marina. Así que, Hilda, cuando quieras, adelante.
Muchas gracias, Marisa. En general y del plástico en particular.
Plastic, more specifically, in the North Atlantic. Why using models? If you think about the ocean, it's huge, and the bottom is something we don't know much about. We just know part of it. We know more about the Earth than the ocean. So we need these modeling tools that indicate where we can find this marine litter. As you know, there are thousands of plastic particles, all of them different sizes, different densities, different compositions, and all these characteristics determine how this litter is going to be transported around the ocean. So modeling this pollution is a challenge. What's the modeling strategy? First, we basically analyze the variables that define each of these items and the environmental variables like the wind or water speed, the temperature, which are going to establish how these items will be transported. This is what we call the conceptual model. Then we take all these variables and correlate them through mathematical equations, and we get the mathematical model. We translate them into a language that the computer can understand, and we let the computer to make the math, and then we analyze the results to really analyze the performance of the models. This is what we did at CleanAtlantic. We created a tool from the scratch, taking into account all these characteristics of plastic, the environmental characteristics, and this tool had to comply with some requirements. First, it had to be able to compute a big amount of particles, a significant amount, without compromising the computing capacity. Also, it had to read all the environmental variables of any model in the world in a NDF model, and it had to be open source. So any user in the world with minimum knowledge of modeling without much effort could use this methodology or this model for free. For the CleanAtlantic model, we selected two types of particle sources: the land-based ones, like rivers, lakes, and the ocean-based, which would be the marine traffic areas sailed by vessels in the European coast. So we implemented the model on three different domains. The global domain, which covers the entire northern Atlantic, higher resolution domains of 1 to 3 countries, and even higher resolution domains, which would be local domains, to control the sources of these plastics and the meteorological and oceanographic models. So basically, we need to think that models are not exactly the reality, but the advantage is that they can be improved throughout the time. This is something we have been doing during these 6 years. We started with a simple model, and as time went by, we improved the model. Now we can simulate different densities of particles. We optimize the way these particles would fall throughout the water column. Now you can know about the approximation to simulate biofouling processes, for example. And we have some tests that show that after reaching the bottom, these particles can go up again. So this is very important, especially in the coastal areas. And I'm going to show you some of the outcomes we got with this model at CleanAtlantic. And this could be a simulation where the colors mean nothing here. You see particles that are static and equidistant, and this is how they would distribute throughout the ocean. So when we started the simulation, we saw that in the beginning, this equidistance was lost automatically, and particles are distributed following these turns. We are seeing here the Gulf of Biscay, the Biscay Bay, and there is a trend of particles staying there. Then we see how the big stain of particles moves to the equator and is transported by the current towards the west. And they are stuck there with that wide current, which is the big current of the Gulf. And these particles concentrate there in the northern Atlantic. This other simulation includes 64 European rivers, and the particles depend on the flow. Higher flow, more particles. And we can see how many rivers that go to the north of Europe. And we see here, for example, the Guadalquivir river, and we see how particles are moving towards the Mediterranean Sea. And we see how this big mass of plastic particles is moving towards the equator and is then transported towards the coasts of the American continent. So these would be two types of simulations, and with all of this we obtained thousands of maps, and we had to harmonize all of these. We had to be more specific in order to get outcomes for the project. So we selected 3 preset areas of interest: the marine reporting units of the marine strategy, or the OSPAC areas, or the ICES rectangles. And you can see here on the right side how the ICES rectangles, the darker ones, show where particles could accumulate. And on the left graph, we have the same simulation, but in this case, we are only considering the rectangles closer to the coast. So the model would show the areas with higher beaching, particles that stay on the beach. And apart from all of this, in each of these sub-areas, we can know which is the origin of these sources that contributed these particles to that polluted area. So, very quickly and in a summarized way, this is not online yet, because but it will be soon. And here we have a platform where we can see a simulation similar to the one I just showed you. And by clicking on one of these areas, we can identify the origins that pollute that specific area. And finally, with all these results from the modeling, we got the maps of the typical routes of these plastic particles throughout the Atlantic area, but also we mapped the areas where they are more prone to accumulate. And we identified the origin of these particles. And with this modeling method, we have solid tools to support environmental decisions. When you implement a mitigation measure at the source, it will be more efficient than implementing it in the destination area. So when we talk about ocean pollution, international collaboration is essential. The ocean does not understand about human laws or borders. The ocean just transports what it has. So the currents will be the ones establishing the trajectories and routes of the plastic throughout the ocean, and obviously the destination of these particles. And in order to understand better the relationships of all these processes and trajectories of the particles, Sara and Pedro will talk about other specific results. Thank you. My name is Sara. I come from the University of Santiago and I work with José Moares and Vicente Pérez Muñoz. And I would like to start with the fact that the model is an approximation of reality. So we wanted to know how well it could predict or forecast the trends. So we worked with a monitoring group with the people from INTECMAR who took some samples in the beach, and we conducted a simulation and saw how good our results were if they adjusted to reality. And once we decided or found that the model could replicate this behavior, we increased the scale. For those of you who are not from Galicia, what we used as a monitoring method were the raft that you can see here in Galicia. These are plastics, floating plastics, bigger than a pen, 25 grams of weight, and they are used for mussel rearing in these rafts. There are some ropes, and every 30, 40 centimeters, we use these tools to alleviate the weight when mussels start to grow and are heavier, so this prevents them from falling down from the rope. So these sticks are then released to the sea because this is an old method, and these sticks can be broken and released to the sea. So what did we do with the 5 work package within the monitoring area? Well, we went to an institute in the Ria de Arousa, and they trained the kids there to pick up these sticks on the beach, and they were informed about the protocols. And the positive thing about this is that they took 200 kilograms of sticks in the beach. And if we compare these collections with the data in the model, on the right side, you can see the beaches that were monitored in the Ria de Arousa, and then in purple, you see the actual behavior. Yellow, blue, and pink are the data of the model for different beaching parameters. Higher beaching, higher retention. So generally speaking, in almost all the beaches, the behavior can be reproduced very well. If we compare the segments, we see that this behavior can also reproduce the model. And this is the case for all of them, except for two specific cases where the model shows that approximations, well, you need to consider them with care. It doesn't mean that the model is wrong, but in those specific area, maybe there is a higher beaching, or the model didn't know how to parameterize that coastline, so the results may be wrongful there. But we could say that thankfully, thanks to science and to, not thanks to God, but thanks to science, that this model works. So once we have this, we are going to increase the study area, the northern area of the Atlantic, and we are going to focus on two areas, the Gulf of Biscay, the Bay of Cadiz, and the Alboran Sea. We are going to talk about the results of the Biscay Bay. You can see the currents there. Warm months are in red and cold months are in blue. During the cold months, it goes from the north to the west, and then it is weaker during the summer. We used the KIMO's model domain. Sometimes we need meshes that cover a very high area, and resolution may not be as precise as we need, but we need to compromise with the model. The results we saw at the Ilha de Arousa, those segments have 200, 500 meters long, and there we use a smaller mesh. But in this case, we have a bigger domain, so we cannot use a 200-meter mesh because the model would not stand it. We need to take into account that we're going to use a low-resolution model of 9 kilometers, so we're going to see different processes. So we conducted a simulation of 7 years with a daily resolution, and we considered 3 types of sources, which were rivers throughout the Atlantic area of the Spanish coast, pressure points, land points covering coastal areas, water management plants close to the coast, population areas, highly populated, and other parameters that are also covered in these on-land points. And as our colleagues from mapping said, we wanted to consider the maritime traffic sources, these fishing gears that are lost when the vessels are on the sea. It's very hard to know when they are lost, so we try to parameterize that behavior with a similar profile throughout the coast. This matches the area with a higher maritime traffic, so that's maybe the place where these missing fishing gears come from. We see that in the Iberian Peninsula, there is a high possibility of accumulation in the Bay of Biscay, but this is the result of a 7-year simulation. It's not very precise. As we have daily results, we can group these accumulations by months and know during which months each source has a higher presence. Here we can see different colors for the sources of the Cantabrian area. Blue would be the Basque Country, Cantabria in red, Asturias in green, and Galicia would be in orange and blue. During some periods, the concentration goes up during the winter, and it goes up in summer. It decreases in summer. Why? Because this red current takes all these particles away from the area. So this is a new result that says that the litter is not going to be still, but we need to analyze these types of behaviors. They are not going to be just still there, but We need to understand if they are moving more during some seasons. And the next step would be to correlate all of this with the different currents and the specific situations of every ocean. And this is what Pedro is going to explain later. We are not only considering the Spanish sources, but also French and Portuguese, in order to consider how this cross-border pollution could be. It is not about borders or limits. The litter is there and it is for everybody. But trying to give some parameters, we see that in the Bay of Biscay, well, orange could be Spain, and we have a 50-50 concentration of French and Spanish sources with a little bit of Portuguese sources. All the accumulations coming from P1, Portugal 1, would go to that area of the Bay of Biscay, but the other ones could not reach it. If we go to the Alboran Sea, we see a higher presence of Spanish sources, and just a little bit from France. But at some point of a year, we can see particles coming from the north. In the case of the Canary Islands, they take the pollution from the south of Spain and Portugal. And this could be the main outcomes we have obtained with these models that we consider very interesting and could help to reinforce what our colleagues already explained. Thank you for your attention.
Antes de que empiece Pedro.
So before I hand over to Pedro, thank you very much, Hilda and Sara, because on top of the great work that you have done, you are great communicators also. So thank you very much for that, and I'm sure that Pedro is also like that too. Okay, so now after Hilda's and Sarah's talks, we're going to talk about the local realm now, but my work is based on what they have done. This is based on the work of the three institutions, actually. So what is this project about? This is a very specific project that was conducted in the Arosa Bay. What we want to do is to try and interrelate the typical behavior maps with meteorological elements. So this is what we are interested in. We're not interested in the components of the litter or the type of litter that we find in our beaches, but the areas where litter has a tendency to become accumulated there. This is what we call accumulation areas. So throughout the whole process, we have worked and we have focused on this type of accumulation areas. We have had a number of approaches. We have used citizenship science with the students of high schools in the Arosa Island. We have done miniaturization with professional technicians. We have worked with drone images, and we have, above all, worked thanks to the models that have been developed with numeric models. So, for us, what we were doing was to focus on the Arosa Bay, and what we were doing was to launch Lagrangian particles representing litter, and what we wanted to do was to look at where they were beached and where they were accumulating. So, at the beginning, what we wanted to do was to look at whether these models were actually capable of, regardless of their limitations, to reproduce, to represent the reality. So this is a sample. This is something that a high school student did. It took pictures of this beach. So apart from just counting birds and things like that, it was sending us a weekly picture. And then later, when when we compared this data with the results that we were having in terms of accumulation of models in that area, what we saw was that the day that we had a greater amount of accumulation was the day when there was more particles being reported for that area. So we were able to conclude that this model was showing some sort of a behavior here. So we had a model. So if we divided the coast into different smaller parts, if we segmented the coastline, and if we, after 24 hours, we counted the particles that had been accumulated in those small segments, we had a map of accumulation for each day. So what we did was to simulate for more than a year and a half on a daily basis these, and at the end of the day we had more than 500 maps showing the accumulation, the model of accumulation of these virtual particles. But of course 500 maps is not good enough in terms of information, so we needed some type of information at the beginning of the project, and before we had the enlargement, extension of the project, we had main maps that were telling us what the average accumulation was for each specific segment, and the maximum accumulation for each specific segment, and also, for example, the amount of days that a segment was going beyond a specific threshold, which was 95 percentile, the percentile number 95. So what we did know and what we suspected was that there was some meteorological phenomena that had an impact on situations. So a northeast wind in a specific part of the island was showing that we had areas where we had a greater accumulation and other areas we had a lesser accumulation. So based on citizenship, we were, or citizenship size, we were, proving this in a way. So we wanted to do in the next stage was to try and relate these winds to typical simulation maps. So the first thing we had to do was to find this typical accumulation maps out of those 500 maps, what the most typical situations were, and then try and conclude what the winds were that were being registered in this specific map. So this is what we did to try and group them together. We used a technique that is called clustering, based on machine learning, and then we used the Cummins algorithm, which is used for aggregation of similar situations. This is a very simple algorithm. It's about choosing how many groups you want to select, and once you have selected the groups that you want to have, you are going to start having a number of figures, random figures, and then you classify situations based on the centroid parameters, and then you start moving this again. You go back to the situations that have been attributed to that, and then you recalculate the new situations belonging to that centroid, and through that iteration process, you get closer to the mass center of the different groups, and you get information about these situations, and you have that centroid as a representative of all of this situation. I've been a bit quick in when I've explained this, maybe not too clear, but the conclusion is that regardless of its limitation, the system, at the end of the day, actually works. So at the end of the day, we have this, we go from 500 maps to 5 clusters that we have determined after a number of tests. So we were able to conclude that these clusters showed 5 different situations, 5 accumulation models. But the first thing that we have here is that when we group this together, what we get is that all maps, and this is like a card game, you have getting together in different groups of cards. So we classified 5 similar situations of similar maps. So we have to also take into consideration that not all groups were the same. We had 2 main situations, and each of these was greater than the other 3 groups, the other 3 remaining groups. So we had 5 groups of similar situations, and what we have also is with each group there is a centroid, which is the, to put it like that, the typical situation in terms of the different parameters that have to be taken into consideration. So to be some sort of a representative, the map of typical accumulation representing each of the different groups. So this is something that we really had. So then we had to do something that was relatively easy. We had to get the groups and then look at the wind, a number of situations affecting each wind on a daily basis. So we needed to look at the wind present on that day and then try and look at whether there was winds per each situation. So it's easy to see here, and sorry if I'm not explaining myself very well. We knew that there were 3 groups with different situations, but we focus on the 2 most important situations where there is more observations. We can see that most of the situations for each of these different groups is registered when there is north or northeast winds, and the other one is registered when there is south or southeast winds. This means that there is a number of maps that are similar to each other, and that typically when we have this type of winds, this is going to happen. So we have a typical situation of northeast winds with a typical accumulation map. This is showing that when there is northeast wind in the northern areas of the island, this is where we get the most accumulation, or for example in the Grove area in the bottom part of the image. And we have other situations also, including southeast and south winds. And the good thing about this is that they show results for a number of different types of wind that are represented by 1 accumulation situation only. And here we can see that, especially in accumulation areas, we have, this in the isthmus of the island, the southern part of the island, and also in the bay of Ribeira and A Pobra do Caramiñal, in the northern part of the image or of this area. So when we look at these typical situations, we compare this to observations, and in this case, we're talking about the observations that have been made by professional technicians on the beaches. And we can see here that in spite of the fact that the typical situations represent different wind situations, if we take both of them together, they're going to show an accumulation. This is what observers found more accumulation. So this is gives us a lot of certainty. But another thing that gives us a lot of certainty is that these typical situations have been seen in reality. And this helps us not only to be able to know where we have to go and try to find a liter with a specific type of wind, but to also try to do other things. And this is a real, actual case that happened in December 2022, where there was a spill outside there by a boat, spill the Arosa Bay. So these hydrocarbon entered the bay, and the first impact of that oil was actually on the isthmus of the island, which had been shown to be a typical accumulation area. And the second impact happened in the northern part of the bay, in A Pobra, in front of A Pobra. So this made us feel certain that this is actually working. And just to end my presentation, we conducted a number of simulations. We grouped them together according to typical situations, and we related meteorological conditions with those typical conditions. We know that this has a lot of limitations, and we know that not only is the wind having an impact on this, but also the type of coast, the type of waves, etc. So we think that this is a very good methodology, or a good methodology at least, and it can. There's a lot of room for improvement by using other types of behaviors beyond the wind and the tide. That is what this model took into consideration. And that's it. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Pedro, because, well, it was very difficult to explain, and you explained it wonderfully. Okay, we have 5 minutes now for comments, for questions. My name is Juan Santos. I work at the Spanish Institute of Oceanography, and my question is for Pedro. Thank you for your wonderful and very interesting presentation, but I would like to ask you, beyond having into account, taking into consideration the wind factor, have you also taken into consideration the flows of water of the Limia and Ulla rivers in terms of looking at the plastic particles entering the bay? Well, in this case, we're not analyzing the sources that much. So we conducted two types of simulation. What the actual hydrodynamic model included is also, the flows of water from rivers, is a number of dimensions, pyroclinical, barotropical parameters. So the hydrodynamics physics was well represented. I mean, as good as possible, really. In terms of including particles, launching particles, we conducted two types of simulations. In one of them, we were filling the bay with particles in the first extension of CleanAtlantic. So as if we didn't know what the origin is, we don't care. Everything is dirty. We want to know about the movements of the slita. In the second part of the process, since we were also working with mussel rafts as tracers, so this was being launched at the mussel rafts only with a frequency that was typical in connection with what we expect in terms of the elements that we were actually launching. And these simulations were conducted by Sara. This is a joint work, and I think that we did something about the rivers too, didn't we? Or didn't we? Well, no. We haven't launched particles in rivers. If we, that has not been clusterized yet. This simulation has been done, yes, but we didn't conduct the analysis to look at the typical situations that this would lead to. Well, this would make sense to a certain extent, because we are not that interested in knowing where they come from, but where they're going to. So we wanted to have as many particles. We don't care about the specific origin or source of this, whether it comes from the Ulla River or the Umia River. We don't really care about this. We wanted to look at the movements, the dynamics, and find out what the areas of accumulation were. Couldn't we use wood or other material elements in the mussel rafts when it comes to using this as tracers? Okay, well, these sticks in the ropes of the mussel rafts were always made of wood until this plastic was started to be used for this. This is Benito Calviño, the head of the environment for the Port of Marin, and he's been working in projects against marine litter for many times now. We're cooperating with them. He's cooperated with many institutions, so we are very happy to have him here today with us. In the beginning, they were made out of wood. And, well, this is just my opinion. I am not a fish gatherer or a shellfish gatherer. I think that the biggest problem is that plastic is cheap. So as soon as, you realize that having wooden sticks for mussel rafts is actually more expensive than plastic. Well, you're going to end up using plastic. Well, and it's also resistant material. So the initial benefits of plastic have led to the, well, damages that we want to actually stop today or put an end to. Isn't there a device that can actually gather the particles, the Green particles, you mean? No, plastic particles. Well, I don't know, I don't think so, but there is something that is actually true. As Sara was saying, the people who work in mussel rafts, they don't want to lose these sticks. I mean, more often than not, they lose these sticks because they have a machine that they use to take out the mussels, and sometimes these machines break the sticks. So maybe well, I don't know how this machine works, but maybe with some sort of a protection to protect that, you could solve the problem. And this would have a benefit for them because they wouldn't have to lose these sticks. I mean, if they break, well, you can't recover that, but you can use this to protect the rest. So these items that we have identified that come from fisheries mainly, such as sticks or nets, of course, fishermen and shellfishermen don't want to lose these sticks or the nets, the fishing gears. There are methodologies and very important projects that focus on trying to find plastic in the ocean. I remember a sentence, and well, this is like going to the Sahara Desert with a vacuum cleaner. I mean, at the end of the day, all of this plastic soup that we can find in the ocean, we won't be able to do anything in terms of catching it with nets or things like that. So we need to try and implement measures to tackle the source of the problem. And I'm not referring to the river, I'm referring to the production of plastic itself. Well, one final comment. We have been focusing on mussel raft sticks, not because it's a big amount of plastic, but because when we started working with Clean Atlantic, we wanted to work on accumulation, and we didn't know how to plan this or how to establish a number of criteria in terms of weight, in terms of item numbers. So looking at the Arosa Bay, we found out that there was an object that was always the same and that was all over the place, and this was mussel raft sticks. So this was like an open door for us to have a representative tracer that is all the time the same, that it behaves in the same way at all times, and that is very abundant, and this is why we decided to use it. Just as like the items that DRAAC, Pedro, and found in Madeira, when we know the origin of that item, we're able to model, we are able to get to perfectly know where this has been deposited, and we can actually trace the whole trajectory. So this is why, well, sticks, mussel raft sticks are a tracer. So it's not about plastic distribution, it's not about plastic pollution. I mean, these plastic sticks are not the problem. Well, one final comment by Pedro, and then we'll move on to the next session.
Things. So all this work is always to provide information for the policymakers to implement something to avoid the problem. So in the case of the mussel pegs, next year, by the end of next year, every member state of the European Union must implement extended producer responsibility on these items. And partially it could be solved by changing the machine, or by making the fishermen to deliver the old ones to buy new ones, or to have a tax, I don't know if it's a tax, but well, a tax, an extra payment in order to pay for the cleanup for the recovery of these materials in the environment. So some strategies must be designed, and for that we need information, not just about the amount that it's lost, but then where is it going for, so that we can look for them in the environment. So the modeling is important, the counting is important, but then we might come across something that is, why is that lost? They don't want to lose it. So we need to improve the machines. That then we will need the engineers to say, how can we improve a machine? And that's nothing about marine litter. So this is very difficult, but we're doing our best.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Muy bien, pues ahora...
Okay, so now in connection with this debate that we have just had and about how to reduce marine litter, how to reduce this waste, this plastic, we're going to move on to the next session. We're going to be tackling a number of approaches geared to reduce marine litter. So the first presentation is going to be given by Mannaart from KIMO. Mike is going to tell us about the organization, is going to be telling us about the pilot project that has been developing at ports with a view to managing wastes, and also about that central hub to collect information about marine litter. So thank you very much, Mike.
About the machine, well, the discussion is now partially about what parts of the machine are already there and how could that be utilized. And that machine differs from country to country. It shouldn't be that way, but it is the way it is. Now, my name is Mike Mannaart. I work with an association of coastal municipalities. It is, of course, very much important that we work internationally together, this cooperation. Now, we try to do that with 9 countries and 11 languages. Now, we do our best. Now, it works well. I have to apologize, Rebecca Morris, Arbel Bentley and Gregor McCord. They couldn't be here. I have to give their regards, especially Arbel. She's working very much on the administrative part at this very moment of the project. And what I'm going to share with you today. Now, examples of initiatives on the collection and upcycling of fishing gear and passively fished waste. So what is done with that kind of stuff that is partially collected in ports, but not only by fishermen and not only by the port authorities, but also by volunteers. And we also have created a Fishing for Litter hub, a resource where we can share knowledge. Now, we will go here. It works. Now, just roughly the structure of the research we did. It was completely different than most of you did, very technical, very in-depth. We had our small other little challenges than you had. What did we do? Now, we had to develop a strategy and guidance on the process of collection of information for the study on waste management, and then aiming specifically on passively fished waste, fishing for litter waste. We run that project already since 2000, 2001. Net cuttings and end-of-life nets. That was the purpose of our work. And we had also to design a number of pilots and to find best practices, if could be. And of course, then the Fishing for Litter hub itself. Now, the approach, organizational framework, I had to work with my international colleagues together. I'm from the Netherlands. My colleagues were in the United Kingdom, and it was a British project. Always makes it a little bit more interesting then, as a kind of a foreigner anyway. It was not my language either, of course. Now, we had to do research, data collection and processing. Now, we did it by means of a survey, interviews we conducted, and finally we decided to have also field visits. And we were aiming, of course, at pilots and the hub. Now, the survey was sent out to quite a lot of British ports, 138, but there were some challenges because information collection was not so easy. Now, the research questions that were also addressed in this survey was about the organizational aspects on how ports managed litter collection and storage, and the lending, and especially the process of storage at ports of passively fished waste, net cuttings and end-of-life nets. And how they recycled it. Did they recycle it there? And what kind of best practices were linked to those ports already? Now, the field visit, I was lucky when I flew to the other side of the North Sea. I could see the Humber estuary. That was the target area. You see it on the right-hand side, about 120, 30 kilometers from Grimsby up north. Most of you don't know, but it doesn't matter. So Eastern England. And there we went to do a number of interviews with port authorities and pilots. Now, you see the ports here, left-hand side, Bridlington Harbour. You have Whitby Harbour on the right-hand side and Scarborough on the right-hand side, and the harbour master and a couple of colleagues on the left-hand side. We had to discuss how things went there. It were not very big ports, but I think representing the area quite well. Now, what we learned when we were on the ground was that the white fishing industry had changed there. When you look at Scotland, it is still there, but in Eastern England, it had collapsed. And they changed their fishing methodologies from using nets in most cases to crab pots. They call that creeling. So that was for me also something I didn't know. Now, you saw, and this impacted our research immediately. It meant for the fishermen that they had three choices, basically. They could continue business as usual with lower catches and lower income, change from catching fish by nets to creeling, so to crab pots, and or become a guard ship for wind farms. Also never heard of that before, but okay, that was interesting. Now here you see all those crab pots on the quayside. Not a lot of nets there. Here you see one of the guard ships in Grimsby Harbour. So this was a former fishing vessel. The captain changed his practices. There was no money enough for fishing, but he became a guard ship for Ørsted. So for the construction of wind farms, those wind farms are being guarded by those ships for a couple of weeks or a month. And in the meantime, they can also do other things, and that we could utilize. So what we have now, the key findings of, and I will just go through it, it's a lot of information, but basically, with only 17% of respondents to the survey, but 30% of the harbours we surveyed assessed participate in the Fishing for Litter scheme, equally divided over England and Scotland in this case. They collect passively fished waste for 30%, roughly 30%, and if they collect this waste, they have facilities there, port reception, basically a skip, container, or the large bin. The problem is only that at the moment when they collect the stuff, it ends in landfill. So they collect it first, they get it out of the sea, excellent, but then it is not recycled, and that's a pity. Now, they also participate, 20% of them participate in end-of-life nets and net cutting collection programs. 75% of the port had a system for disposing net and net cuttings, also great, but the same applies there. They don't recycle it in most cases. It goes to landfill or in some cases to incineration as well. So that is a pity. And what we learned is that crab pots and lobster pots, something new for me, you know it more here in the south, pose a special challenge for upcycling because it's a metal frame covered by plastic and then also with nylon and other kind of stuff. How are you going to take that apart and recycle that? And what we learned as well, that they were allowed to have 2,000 of those things for each ship by the new regulations. So one of the ports said that they had 30,000 crab pots. So a lot of them got lost and are on the seafloor. Now, what do we do with it? There were a number of pilots. So best practices, we had, for instance, we had a number of interviews. We had Journey Blue Net Collect. Their fishermen can hand in their waste nets and also their ropes. Ørsted. So, of course, they build wind farms, completely different business, but the guard ships, they have a scheme that collect, while they are at sea, collect nets, ropes and buoys. And because they're quite often tagged, at the moment when they are of good condition, they hand them in back to the fishermen that lost them. So it's a kind of just a reuse scheme. And then we have Plastics at Bay, that is based in the Western Islands in Scotland. There they collect also nets and ropes from beaches. There, what was already said, when you have a low population density, that poses challenges, not a lot of people. But they engaged local population to collect it and to upcycle it there. And they make flakes out of it and they sell those particles as well and they melt it as a kind of a raw plastic material, a plug, as they called it, to other kind of processors. So then it can be reprocessed. Here you see Captain Peterson of the Ørsted scheme in Grimsby. Now you see here, by the way, the little picture here is where the Plastics at Bay have the kind of very, very simple facility where it is washed by the rain. The nets, yeah, when you look at an industrial scale, it's of course a completely different story. But there it is washed, it is cleaned and it is cut in pieces. And there they produce the plastic plaques. Now, problems are, of course, what you learned, the number of people present in a certain area. I come from the Netherlands, so we have people everywhere, but it doesn't apply to other countries, of course. Funding is a major thing, especially when you look in terms of transport your waste. If you have a coastline of over 1,000 kilometers, how are you going to transport this stuff? You can't pay for that. It's too expensive. Participation is a thing, and also a lack of governmental support for this kind of local initiatives. That is quite a thing. Now, general recommendations, there should be facilities present in ports for marine litter. All fishing ships should be allowed, even if they didn't register, to participate in such a scheme. Now we have the Port Reception Facility Directive, of course, for other countries now. And all the things, so passively fished waste, ELDFG and ALDFG should be accepted there. And there must be waste reception facilities, but also you should be possible to recycle that. And you can never do that on a very small scale, so you need to do that at a regional scale at least. That is costly. But locally you can only do it small scale, but if you want to make it bigger, you need a larger area. But investments, how are you going to pay for that? Now, all kind of other things in general, just linking to what I just said, also education of ships and so on. Recommendations for development of waste pilots, sufficient amounts if you want to start your own pilot, maybe people want to do it, sufficient amount of marine litter should be present for the longer term for collection and processing. You cannot estimate it entirely, but you have to make a viable business model, otherwise you need input. And sufficient is different because when you want to do it in an economically viable way, commercially it's more difficult. If it's just a voluntary project, it's a different scale. And I'm not going to list all those things, but you need at least to have a good understanding and a clear vision of really what you want and what the parameters are there. So what kind of marine litter are you aiming at? What would you like to do with it? What kind of costs are involved with it? And what kind of technological means and knowledge do you need? And what, especially the costs and your market if you want to sell your products. Now, then, of course, the presence of all what I just listed is needed to make it all work. And that is about this part of the project. If you want to know more, just you can always send me an email or ask. This is the Fishing for Litter Hub. We had already this kind of resource on the internet, and by the help of this great project in the international cooperation, we expanded it. So we show now how do you fund your Fishing for Litter scheme in your own country? How can you implement it at the national level? Port reception facilities, operational management, monitoring, public relations strategy, and best practices. You can all find it there. We also made it available in more languages than we did before. So Galician and Basque is there as well now, well, especially, and also of course Portuguese and Spanish and French. And we show the participating ports that increased for 98 up to 140. So there we can learn from each other how things are being done or what challenges you meet. And now, apart from this, we have also the Fishing for Litter Coordinator Group. Marissa is also is part of it, and some of you also sometimes participate. There we discuss with the national coordinators about passively fished waste, how you could deal with this and what kind of legislation applies and how you could fund this kind of things. So it is not linked to the hub, but additional input is provided. And we have, of course, our own files, but we link that at least by our own minds to it. And if we need to feed into the hub, we will do that as well. Now, that was all. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks million, Mike, for this great job, and it was really great that you could join the group in this second phase of the project, and you have got very, very interesting results and points that are going to be really inspiring for new action. So thank you. We are going to pass to the next presentation, but I hope we have time at the end of the session to address some of the questions. Yes. So for the next presentation, we have Luis Gómez from CETMAR, our dear colleague in the area that has been working very hard on marine litter projects in the area, on fishing for litter, and especially on derelict fishing gear. So Luis is going to present the results of a study on derelict fishing gear as mapping and removal. So Luis, the floor is yours.
Gracias. Bueno, nada, como Marisa dijo, bueno, acaba de decir.
Okay, thank you very much. So I work at CETMAR and I've been working on the project since its inception almost, and we have been focusing on, well, as you know, the project has a goal which is to improve and enhance the reduction of the presence of marine litter in the Atlantic area in cooperation with a number of stakeholders, mainly from the fisheries and maritime sector. CleanAtlantic and within the framework of CleanAtlantic, we have conducted a lot of work in terms of information collection and a lot of field work, actually, also, as some colleagues have already brought to the table. So in this case, what we're going to present here today is a specific initiative that was conducted in Galicia for the collection of abandoned or lost fishing gear. So when we decided to do this, which took place during the second stage of the process, we knew that we had short time frames and also limited economic means. So what we did was to actually, together with a group of scientists and divers who have a lot of experience in terms of limiting the area where we were going to actually try and identify the abandoned and lost fishing gear. So by looking at the availability of staff, time and funds, we decided to focus on the Vigo Bay and the Pontevedra Bay. To this end, we tried to cooperate with a number of stakeholders, such as diving clubs and also some shellfishers who gather sea urchin and also raise the shell. And also we cooperated with the Galician Coast Guard, who have helped us at all times whenever we have needed their help and expertise. During this first semester of 2022, we contacted these diving clubs and 2 fishermen associations in the Vigo Bay, which are the fisher associations of Vigo and Cangas, and we identified a total of 14 clubs, diving clubs, and 8 of them showed an interest to take part in this cooperation. The second thing we did was to look at how to compile information regarding this ALDFG in this area. So we decided to set up a form to compile information, to gather information, quite easy to use form that enabled us to get to know the most important information regarding that lost and abandoned fishing gear. First of all, to characterize the areas where they were, the date when they were found, and the type of fishing gear, their size, and also the possibility for these forms to actually include some images or pictures that might have been taken of this fishing gear. So we tried to validate this form, and we used our connections with project partners who have this type of experiences, and also we had the cooperation of divers who have an experience in collecting nets. Once we did this, we decided to provide diving clubs with a link so that they didn't need a user password, because this was going to make things more tedious for them. So we gave them the direct link so that they could just click on it and access the form and fill the form. And also, if they needed, maybe, well, continue the process at a later stage. So that form, as you can see, has the fields that have been already described, and it's quite simple to actually complete, it's quite simple to actually fill. So what we wanted to do with this information was to actually conduct a mapping of the situation in terms of what we had found in the two bays. So we have a track record of the diving clubs from previous activities and all the activities that could be carried out through over the period of this project, November 22 and June 23. So we had the location of these spots together with some information regarding the characteristics of the fishing gear that was being found, and also we had the possibility to include pictures and some information regarding the seabed. And this is the difference in terms of well, data between November 22 and June 23, and we assume that still today we will have the opportunity to complete this or to add some complementary information to this before we actually deliver this part of the project. So another part of this action, pilot action, was the possibility to actually collect some of this fishing gear. So we thought that we could conduct maybe 2 or 3 collections given the time and funds that we had at our disposal. And to this end, we actually took into consideration a number of aspects that have been considered in other initiatives, such as the dimensions and type of fishing gear that we want to actually collect or recover, and the effects or the impacts that they can have on the environment, because more often than not they can be more harmful than recovering them. And also we looked at the associated risks in terms of recovering this fishing gear, because they are quite big. You need mechanical means, therefore, and this is something that we need to take into consideration too. So more often than not they are at a depth of 50 meters, and sometimes diving in these areas is quite risky. So we had a scientific diving team that was very experienced. Also, the Galician Coast Guard Service helped us to handle this fishing gear, so we could bring them on board of a boat that they have, which is the Valentin Paz Andrade, which is a boat that they use for training purposes too. And this made it easier for us, and this made it much more affordable for us to actually recover these nets. In one of the cases, in the case of the first fishing gear, we had also the participation of the Hombre y Territorio Man and Land Association, which is based in Sevilla. Patricio and David, who are 2 representatives of this association, joined us here and took part in the recovery of this first fishing gear. And the work that they are conducting is in the framework of the Life Intermares project. There are people here today who know this project very well. And this is a very interesting initiative whereby they try to map this lost fishing gear, not only in Galicia, but in the whole Spanish coast. So a database has been created, which is accessible through a website that is very easy to use, and you can enter information about fishing gear that you might have found. So if there are people who are taking part in this type of activities, I would recommend them to actually have a look at this website and to report the fishing gear that they have found. The first recovery took place last year, October. It was a wonderful day when it was raining a lot and it was very cold. So these 2 people coming from Sevilla almost got frozen. So everything went very well. We had the help of these coast guards, and we were able to actually retrieve a net that is typically used here in Galicia for catching spinous spider crab, and it was like 12 meters under the surface of the water, and it was like 400 meters and 470 kilos, and there was entangled ropes, taps, pots, and baits, small crabs that are used for catching cuttlefish, and a number of elements that were not a part of the net itself, but that entangle, I mean, contribute to entangling things. So if we look at the map and we click on the map, we will be able to watch a short video. This is the Coast Guard vessel. These are the divers, Garci and Iñaki, who helped us a lot throughout the whole process. This is the moment where they actually liberate or free these spinous spider crabs who have become entangled in the net. So on the day of the retrieval, we try and free all the animals that might have become entangled and that are still alive. The second recovery of a fishing gear took place in the Vigo Bay in a coral area. It was a similar fishing gear also for catching spinous spider crab, and more often than not, you have to actually cut these nets to be able to retrieve them. And more often than not, it's actually impossible to do this. In this case, we had to actually lift the fishing gear twice because the machine that we had available on board was not capable of actually lifting it. So just like it happened in the previous case, if we click on the image, we will be able to see another video, the same boat as you can see, and these are this is the net. This was a better day in terms of weather, which we were thankful for. And as you can see, it's entangled, so it's difficult to lift. So we needed these machines, and we needed a lot of people also. And on that day, we also retrieved another net that was much closer to the coast, 5 kilometers away, 5 kilometers deep, near the Toralla Island, with that big building, that tall building. And this was a net that Garci knew that was there. It was actually damaging the sea bed. And, since the damages that this was having on that sea bottom is something that we don't want to actually allow, well, we retrieved this net, and this had been prepared by the divers for the retrieval to be easier. And as you can see on some of the images, it was covered with seaweed. If we click on the map, we are going to be able to watch this video that shows us the type of net. There was a lot of bait entangled, and this is when we are actually lifting the net. This is me doing some Tarzan things, and as you can see here, the net is full with seaweed because it had been there for a long time. All of this information, apart from being a part of the deliverables of the project, is going to be included in a 5-minute video that we haven't been able to have ready to present to you here today at this final conference of the project. But this video is going to include information on the project, on the goals, and the things that have been done within the framework of this pilot action. We're going to also include information by means of a map that locates the findings of the project, and also we're going to include, well, more information about the retrieval of these 3 nets. So, conclusions. Well, we can say that the response was quite positive in this case. From the diving clubs at the earlier stage of the process, we actually contacted the fishing sector, but they are a bit more, I don't know, reticent when it comes to actually respond to this type of requests. Divers are more willing to help because actually these nets are dangerous for them too, and they know well about this problem. So, they were not as reluctant as the representatives of the fishing sector. But when it comes to actually filling the form, I don't know, it's like everybody finds this process very tedious, and it's difficult for people to actually do it. So that information, as we have said, is going to be included in a map. and is going to be a part of a video also. We're also going to report that information to the Life Intermares project because we think that this type of initiatives are very valuable and that we need to make our contribution instead of having our own servers, our own devices. We all need to bring these things together so that we have platforms or global devices that help us all and that offer a much more global information. This has been also useful for us to look at the risk and benefits of this type of actions and also the needs in terms of actually participating with teams of experts or professionals, because this should not be done with amateur people because it's actually dangerous. And we would also like to thank the Galician Coast Guard services because without them it would have been impossible to do this. And going forward, well, the similar type of lines of work that can be developed is, for example, to extend this type of activities to the whole of Galicia and to participate with regional institutions and also to conduct awareness-raising activities that are also of fundamental importance in this regard. And we think that the use of technologies such as scanners, ROPs, etc., can help us have more information regarding the location of this lost or abandoned fishing gear. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to actually tell you that we have some pictures that, for example, pictures from the Mar Limpo Clean Sea project, pictures of cleanup processes that have been carried out in coastal areas with the help of shellfishers who gather sea urchin or razor shell. So these show some intertidal areas and other areas of the coast where we can see this type of activities being carried out. So in all cases, we can see that there is a presence of these fishing gear. This is evident, and they are there. They need to be recovered. They need to be retrieved. And within the framework of this project, a great effort has been exerted with a view to recovering this type of materials that are actually harming the coast greatly. I would like to thank my colleagues for this information, Aida and Ancho particularly. They've been working on this for a long time, and also Shira, Rula, or Laura, who've been working with us in the last few months, and I would like to thank them too, and also Raquel for their help, and also would like to help them for being so great in terms of their cooperation and their support. So thank you very much.
Como habéis visto, a mí no me...
Okay, he didn't thank me. He didn't thank me, as you could see. So I'm going to write that down. Marisa, I have posters of you. I have pictures of you on my walls. I used to have Samantha Fox pictures on my walls, and I have your pictures. Did you like that compliment or not? Because otherwise I'm just going to go and try and go to the job seekers institutions to try and get another job. So let's ignore this last minute. Okay, thank you, Luis. I don't know if you have any questions or remarks. In any case, we're going to leave that for the end of the session. We're going to now move on to hand over the floor to the next speaker, who's going to be Marie Babinot from CEDRE. CEDRE has played a very important role also in CleanAtlantic and a number of different fields. So she's going to be telling us about the results and also the guidelines that have been created in terms of beach and port litter cleanup techniques. So you have the floor.
So I'm going to... One. Okay. That's Marine's presentation. That's not mine.
Sí. Si no es rápido, sí. So what we can change the order. If Marie, you can sit here if you don't mind. So while they are managing the issue, we can follow with the last presentation. That is not going to be the last now. And so now we are going to have Pedro Sepúlveda from DRAAC, from Madeira, that is going to show the results of the fishing gear life cycle studies they have done. So Pedro and DRAAC, Pedro and Nicola, they have also been very, very supportive and helpful partners, very motivated from the very beginning. So thank you for being so strong partners. And the floor is yours, Pedro.
Thanks, Marisa. I'd like to reply to your kind words and to thank you and CETMAR for the opportunity to be here, for the wonderful coordination throughout this 6 years. It's been forever that we're working on this. Yes, for us it's a very nice opportunity. I will try to show to you a bit of what is needed in order for us to get to recycling of fishing gear. So this is just a small part. We need to know a lot more. So first, where is Madeira? So over here in the middle of not in the middle, but more in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean than where we are at now. So it's an area with an influence of the Northern Gyre, the current that goes through the Iberian coast, and also on the influence of the Mediterranean. So oceanic islands are just barriers for marine litter. It all gets beached there. So it's a very interesting opportunity to understand what's going on with the ocean and not really with coastal areas. So the increase in marine plastic pollution is an unprecedented risk to oceanic islands for several reasons, not only the litter going there, but for non-indigenous species colonization and others. There is, throughout all of us, high motivation to prevent marine litter, reduce it, minimize its impact on the degradation of ecosystems and loss of biodiversity. But this is very challenging for our region because our measures cannot have any effect on the amount of items that we collect that are from other regions. And on these 3 photos you can see on the first one, this is a fishing tag used in Maine, so North American coast, the famous mussel pegs or palitos from Vigo, or several other fishing gear that we don't use there. So the first thing was a modeling study from our colleagues in Arditi that showed what was the most likely accumulation sites in our region. And as you can see, well, it's not surprising, the northeast facing sites are facing the main currents, so they are probably the most likely accumulation site. And so in 2019, we did a specific cleanup campaign on that site. And in one event, just 20 man-hour, 1 hour, we were there for 1 hour, and we retrieved 30 cubic meters of litter. And on the first site, 90% of it was shipping or fishing. So let's call it navigation, anyone that's working on the sea. These are some photos again. These very interesting buoys have Vigo written all over them. So we said, well, interesting. We need to know more about this. So more or less at the same time, the Single-Use Plastic Directive set ambitious measures to reduce plastic waste and to increase collection and to increase recycling. So we knew that there were insufficient incentives to return fishing gears to the coast. Mike told about the Fishing for Litter project. But plastic components of fishing gear should have high potential for recycling. And the EU Single Plastic Directive, together with the Port Reception Facilities Directive, has established a date, 31st of December of 2024, for every member state to establish EPR schemes for fishing gear. So this was really a challenge because we knew not much more about this challenge. So on the scope of responsible consumption and production, we know that accounting for the consumption of products and the production of waste makes it possible to define efficient strategy for economic and environmental terms for the management. On the waste hierarchy, we know knowing and accounting the waste being produced allows the assessment of possible destination, avoiding the last step, which is disposal or landfilling. And knowing and accounting for the products being purchased today allows us to scale up waste management systems and to investigate how to keep it circulating in the economy, so circular economy. This is also one of the main areas of work on my department. So we need to go from waste to circular economy. So to minimize this potential impact of fishing gear on marine ecosystems and to implement the necessary public policies, we needed to evaluate the quantities, their origins, and potential end-of-life destinations. And here again, you can probably relate with some of these companies on the photos and some of the buoys, because we don't have this there, not even the octopus boats. So we knew that, and now we know more about it. So the first thing, how much is produced locally? So we set up a very mad team, I'll call it like this, because so this is one of the characterization of litter coming from accumulation sites. So lots of litter. We go through the whole thing and divide it in different categories and try to get to know more about it. And still, by the end of the day, the team is smiling. So I don't know what happened with us. Must be some product in the fishing gear. And so we decided that for us it would be very interesting to establish a study on the fishing gear life cycle. And this would evaluate the flow of fishing gears in Madeira. It's a closed system. It's an island, so we know we could know what is coming in. So the first study we conducted was on professional fishing and aquaculture in 2021, and a second complementary study on coastal leisure fishing. And all these are available in the CleanAtlantic website. So we identified the quantities, the types, and their origin and potential end-of-life destinations, and the studies produced recommendations relating to the management of fishing gear. And then to contribute to the development of a more sustainable and circular model, in this case for fishing gear in Madeira, and this is also on the scope of our regional strategy for circular economy, the Madeira Circular. So this is a material flow model. This is very complex, but I'll try to divide it. So first thing is what's coming in. So the materials could come in from acquisition, the first buy, and then replacement parts. And this is for fishing gear in general. Some fisheries won't have this, others will. The idea is to keep the materials in the system and to avoid them to go to the ocean. So abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear. And to try to establish circular economy models, we need to reuse and to maintain and repair the materials. But there is also another thing coming into the system, which is the things we recover in beach cleanups or the things that are recovered in fishing for litter schemes or seabed cleanups. So acquisition, replacement parts, and ALDFG recovered are the entries of the system. Then, if the items go through the system, at some point they will be non-reusable or they will be lost or end of life, and then they will come in the waste management, which is something that we that work with marine litter don't really know about it. So what we came across is that part of this fishing gear was landfilled because it cannot be incinerated or shredded, or it is highly contaminated, so it must be landfilled. Then there's a more or less interesting thing, which is energy recovery. So these materials have high energy value. But what we meant to do was to separate it for recycling and then recycling it. Now, starting with fisheries, we need also to understand what type of fisheries we have and what is the composition of fishing gear. And so in Madeira we have two larger types of fishery, angling and seine. We have a small fleet and with very artisanal gear. But still, on drifting long line, the equipment is composed by snoods, streamer lines, hooks, and buoys. And snoods have polyamide, which is nylon, and polyethylene. But the streamer lines are nylon, the hooks are steel. So when we speak about fishing gear, it's not all plastic. It's not the same kind of plastic. And you cannot recycle polyamide with polyethylene. You cannot do that. So this makes things even harder. Then if you go to depth long line or leap and pole or whatever, you'll know that this gets harder and harder. The other major fishery type is seine or encircling, and it's nets that we didn't know. The fishermen did, but we didn't know. They are made of nylon, so when they lose the gear, it gets sink. So we never found a fishing net of this material on beach. So we thought our fishermen are great. They don't lose gear, but it should be on the ground and not on the beach. So it's not, maybe they are not that great as we thought at first. Then we needed to know the size of the fishing fleet. And so there was an analysis of the type of fishery, the number of boats and so. And then a statistical analysis of median gear used per type of fisheries, because we cannot know for sure how much is being used by each fisherman. So this was a work with the fishermen and the Fishermen Association. So you'll know that, for example, for a small boat on drifting long line, they will have 10 appliances per vessels and an average length of the snood for 4 kilometers and an average number of filaments of 90, and each of them with 500 meters. So this is very detailed to know. So this would give us a number of the actual figures coming out of the system and coming in of this into the system. The same thing about aquaculture. We have over there some companies of offshore aquaculture for fish. So we would need to know the number of aquaculture and the size of fishing farms. We also approached them. They were very polite to answer. And then the gear composition of the aquaculture systems, which is floating structures in a totally different composition when we analyze the plastic, and then cable, nets, and buoys. So the conclusion of this first study was on fisheries. The nylon stock in Madeira should be 33 to 132. You know, it's not really very accurate. And there should be, only in Madeira, 20,000 buoys. On aquaculture, more than 26,000 square meters of nets and all the associated components. And what we know is that nylon should, well, they all buy in the same store. So we know for sure what they are buying every year. So it's 4,600 kilograms of nylon. So we inferred that they should be losing that same amount. And nylon is a very high economic valued material. So it's easy to handle it if we retrieve things at end of life management. But still, we're on an island. We need to take account of the costs to transport it to mainland. So this could be a limiting factor when we think about recycling. Another thing is everything else is more or less polyethylene and polypropylene. And we need also to take into account that aquaculture equipment generally includes algaecide, impregnating agents, and then the mixture of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear collected on beaches all have that problem of contamination. So these materials have very low to none economic value, and well, from the industry perspective, the amounts that we generate each year is very, very small. So they don't want it. They don't have any interest in this. So if we want to implement a future EPR scheme, we need to have this into account. So this values nothing. It's a lot in our case, but for the industry is none. So we will need to have compensation for this because someone needs to pay for this. Then on the other study, the leisure fishing, it was quite difficult because the fishing gear bought for professional is on a single store. They don't buy it on Alibaba or Amazon or whatever, but for leisure coastal fishing gear, they do it. So we have, the numbers are not that good, but it showed that we need to improve the data streams. So the recommendation of the studies, it was divided in 3 major groups. Improving the knowledge on waste production. So we needed to place specific waste containers in fishing ports. We need to go through and characterize all the litter deployed there and to raise awareness among fishermen. And within CleanAtlantic and in other projects, We get to engage the fisheries department, the port authority, Arditi, which is the investigation agency, and the company that, the waste managers in Madeira. So all three sectors were there. And nowadays we have all the containers in fishing ports. We have started the characterization and there was awareness raising among fishermen. The establishment of EPR scheme was another recommendation, and we're working on it, but we're still a bit far apart. And the development of high value chain for end-of-life fishing gear. So establish the contacts with the recycling companies. We did it. Develop local circular economy models. This was a recommendation. It's very hard to achieve, as we knew afterwards. So what are we doing now? We need to continue to improve the knowledge on waste production. So the regional beach litter monitoring program nowadays has 10 sites, 4 times a year, dedicated team. We can evaluate trends, good environmental status on coastal, because the ocean is a different story. And we can now analyze more accurately what is single-use plastic and what is coming to the sea, from the sea. A regular beach cleanup program in accumulation sites. We established annual contracts with former fishermen, and we now do 10 plus events per year, more than 4 tons removed. And now we can look into that analysis of where it's coming from, either activity and also geographic source. And the idea is, if we have the funding, to increase the number of locations, because this will provide more information and we can progress further. The establishment of fishing for litter schemes. The colleagues from the fisheries department have done a very interesting work on this. Now more than 10%, they started this last year, more than 10% of the fleet is already engaged. They just receive a flag. You can see a fisherman over there really glad about their flag that they can use, and they receive a t-shirt. So that was not very difficult to do this, and they deployed 1 ton of end-of-life gear and 3 tons of passively fished. And this is really this is not passively fished, this is actively fished, because our gear doesn't well, the litter doesn't get to, yeah, you know what I mean. It doesn't collide with the nets, because the nets are not on the bottom. It doesn't collide with the hooks. So when they see a net or something floating, they will take it and bring it on shore, which is very good, because the fisheries department is providing specific awareness raising. So this is growing, and it's a good work. Future work stream, geographical source likeliness analysis. This will be done together with the modeling team, and be aware of this, because I think we will produce something really nice in the next years. Circular economy models. We need to go also to laser boat fisheries, material flow. Again, very challenging. We need to characterize regularly the waste streams, all of them, not only on fishing ports, but what do laser fishers deploy at their own homes, to create data streams on imported and sold fishing gear, and to be possible to evaluate circular economy models. And then, of course, continue the awareness raising on environmental programs. On DRAAC, we have several European programs. And so, on the key message, and this is a very nice photo of one cleanup event on an accumulation site. So if you're willing to buy any of these shoes, just contact me afterwards. Global problems needed coordinated efforts, and that's why I thank the wonderful work of CETMAR in coordinating this very large teams of people that want to investigate several different things and to make this one coordinated effort. Highlight the importance of cooperation, and the Interreg Atlantic is one of the possibilities we have to establish this cooperation. And of course, we must keep our efforts aligned if we want to even think about having this problem better. I'm not going to say solved, but at least to make it better. And if you need any clarification, just send me an email. Okay? Thank you very much.
So thanks million. inspiring because we have to develop similar studies in other regions, and we have learned a lot from your outputs. And also thanks for this clear presentation of the challenges, because it's really a very complex and challenging issue. So thank Pedro. So Marie, sorry, but now we are going to have your presentation, I hope.
I'm not lucky today.
Oh my God. So we have to wait for the good things, you know.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So I'm going to present some of the results of CEDRE's work on Work Package 7, actions 7.1 and 7.4, the identification of beach and port litter and associated cleanup techniques. Those actions had two main objectives. The first one was to map and characterize litter stranded on the coast or floating in ports in the Atlantic area. And the second one to review cleanup operations, techniques and resources, costs, and good cleanup practices. To this end, we made two online surveys with the support of the CID. One to identify cleanup techniques and map litter accumulation sites along the Atlantic area coastline. It was for the action 7.4. And the second one to identify floating litter pollution and response techniques in ports of the Atlantic area for the action 7.1. We targeted the public establishments, the government services, the local authorities, managers of protected sites, and various other organizations like NGOs. The surveys were translated and disseminated in the 5 partner countries with the help of the CleanAtlantic partners. So thank you for that. So with the time I have available, I'm going to present a few key elements that emerged from the first survey, the identification of litter accumulation sites and cleanup techniques on the Atlantic area coastline. So I'll just give you a quick background. An initial survey was carried out in France in 2020. A report was written and the results were presented at the first final conference in 2021. With the extension of the CleanAtlantic project, we were able to rework this survey, translate it with the help of the CleanAtlantic partners, and disseminate it to the other 4 partner countries in the project, so Ireland, Spain, UK, and Portugal. We received almost 300 responses, but considered only 51 of them usable, duplicates little or more or no information. That's 25% of the responses. These 51 respondents are spread across the 4 partner countries, as you can see on the map. There were mainly NGOs, 24%, and municipalities, 20%, whose role is to raise awareness and carry out cleanup operations for more than 65% of them. The geographical areas are considered local, which suggests a good knowledge of the local situation by the respondents. Thanks to the survey, we were able to identify 117 potential litter accumulation sites on the coast, including 32 marine hotspots, quantities in excess of 10 cubic meters per year. The accumulation sites are evenly distributed along the Atlantic area coastline, as you can see on the map. There is no clear link between the type of coastline, mudflat, rocky or sandy beach, and the quantities of litter found. Almost half of all respondents confirmed the presence of polystyrene in their geographical area. Respondents gave their perceptions of beach pollution, which are detailed in the report published last month. I'm going to come back to the operators of the cleaning operations and the associated techniques. The operators of these cleaning operations are generally local councils, 43%, and NGOs, 37% of them. In fact, these local authorities make the biggest financial contribution to the operations. The implementation of these cleaning operations varies according to several key factors: cost, availability of operators, weather conditions, or even environmental sensitivity. Operators don't have a precise idea of the costs associated with the operations, as 89% of tools are manual and people are mainly volunteers. Some measures are in place to reduce the amount of litter washed up on beaches and are becoming increasingly common. There are many awareness-raising actions with two objectives. The first one is to encourage people not to litter, and the second one to encourage people to pick up. Protective equipment is also being introduced in certain areas and seems to be increasingly popular with municipalities too. These include, for example, tidal bins or barriers. For more information, you can find the report on the CleanAtlantic website. I will now briefly present the results of the second survey, this time focusing on floating litter in port areas. This survey was created as part of the extension of the CleanAtlantic project, and it's not the result of an initial survey carried out in France. The results are therefore associated with the 5 partner countries. Here too, we received over 200 responses, but only 71 were usable, which represent 35% of the responses. The respondents were mainly administrations and agencies, 21%, or port authorities, 15%, although many did not define themselves as such. Their role is to set up 65% and finance 43, and finance cleanup operations. All types of ports were surveyed. Also, smaller local ports were more represented. The map shows the location of respondents who defined themselves as port authorities. Respondents reported that manual tools like long scoops, boat hooks, or landing nets are mainly used for cleaning operations. They also use dedicated boats or robots. Unlike beach litter, respondents do not consider port litter to be a major problem. And this perception of pollution can also be found in the report associated with this survey. It can also be seen that cleaning operations are most often based on manual tools, 48%, although some ports also use mechanical tools, 25%. Few respondents answered the question of funding for cleanup operations, and a lot of them had no idea who funds these operations. For the majority of them, of those who responded, funding would not come from the proposed choice, but from other category. The idea that emerged from the comments was that funding will come directly from port authorities. And the responses show that most respondents have no idea neither of the costs associated with the port cleanup operations. Only 3 respondents provided an approximation of the yearly costs. The costs presented range from 3,000 euros to 90,000 euros. As on beaches, we'll find measures in place to reduce floating litter, such as dedicated floating bin, 18%, or other type of bins, 44%, awareness-raising sign, like the "Here begins the sea" sign, 24%. Oh, that's okay. Some ports mention the use of protective equipment, like little recovery boats, 23%, or retention nets, 18%, 16%, sorry. And 34% say that there is no equipment in place. To conclude on these two surveys, they have conducted to identify beach litter accumulation sites and hotspots, find out how pollution is perceived by users of the coastline and port areas, make an inventory of beach and ports cleaning methods, techniques, and good practices. And I really encourage you to go and read the two reports, which go into more detail on respondents' perceptions and cleanup or awareness actions. A beach cleanup guide had also been created in 2020 and is online on the CleanAtlantic website. And I would like to thank you all for your help in translating the surveys and helping to distribute. Thank you.
So many thanks, Marie, for this great job, and sorry for the delay in having your presentation. So we are almost at the time for a lunch break, but I don't know if there is any comment or questions that you would like to raise based on the last presentations. So perhaps very briefly, I'm sorry because sometimes I'm very provocative, but I would like to make use of the presence of a key technology center in plastics here, that is INPLAS. Okay, so thank you for coming to our meeting, and perhaps you could make some reflections about. We know you have a long experience on working on trying to recycle different marine litter issues, different plastics. So would you like to share something with us? ¿Que te gustaría compartir algo? Puedes presentarte si quieres.
Hola a todos. Hi everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is...
Group of mechanical recycling. And we have some projects, and we are very active with similar projects, trying to have a valorization of this kind of waste. One of the main problems that we usually have with this kind of waste is, as some of the opponents said, we have a lot of different types of plastics, also mixed with metals, cotton, I don't know, everything that can come to your mind. So this is one of the problems. Another problem is the size of the nets. Also, and also we don't have an industrial system prepared for the treatment of this kind of waste.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my opinion, the way that we need to try is to make this possible at an industrial level and obviously profitable in economical. That it's the difficult part.
Okay, so thank you so much. So Ruben, would you like to add something? No, as you have the microphone. So Ruben, he's a very good colleague of CETMAR, as Juan Pablo, because he worked here a few years ago and he has been involved.
Simplemente estaba pasando.
Okay, I was just handing over the microphone to another person, so I wasn't intending to take the floor, but okay. My name is Ruben, and well, we cooperate with INPLAS, and all the problems that we have, I think, are been mentioned in today's presentation. The problem to look at the way waste actually move and how they have an impact on us, and the difficulties of actually working with the fishing gear at the specific depth. I was having a doubt. I was thinking of something. I mean, how long does it take? As well, Luis mentioned, well, it's clear that, well, just like the wreck of a boat that sunk, when does it become a problem in terms of retrieving it? I mean, more often than not, that is the doubt that we might have. I think it was made clear in any case that it's important to retrieve this type of waste. Well, we work quite a lot in trying to find solutions for later by using all the information that we have and trying to go a step further. In the case of Madeira, and the case of nylon, which is a highly valuable product, and then buoys, metal, all the associated things. Well, it's not that easy. That's the problem. There are materials of high value, so all of this is very complex. And that's it, basically. I mean, I was just handing over to somebody else, as I said. I was just passing the mic on. I have a doubt. Has anybody presented a government here in Galicia with a report to tell them, look, the cost of retrieving plastics of the seabed is this. So maybe we should, since this is a higher cost than if we did different things in a different way, everything was done ecologically a while ago. Plastic bottles, nowadays, there are mainly Coke bottles. So please, Coca-Cola, pay this money, because it is expensive for us to retrieve this product. That is your product. So companies manufacturing this product should pay for the retrieval of these products. I think this is very good food for thought, as final food for thought for this presentation. So if you like, we're going to have lunch now. We're going to have a pause, a break now for lunch, and I'll see you back here at 2:30, and we can continue discussing these things during lunchtime. Thank you.